Today, Miles Morales is one of the most successful and beloved Marvel characters. In fact, so much so that he has his own video game. And he was the protagonist of an animated movie that we might consider as the best Spider-Man movie in history. With all this in mind, it's hard to imagine a time when the character was rejected. But when Miles Morales was announced in 2011, this is precisely what happened. Not only because it meant the replacement of Peter Parker, who is the most popular character in all of Marvel, but because we're talking about a racial change, and the public usually does not react very well to these changes. It doesn't matter if this happens in an alternate universe like the Ultimate Universe, or that Miles is not exactly the same character as Peter, the reaction is usually the same. But if this is true, how do we go from rejecting it to wanting it? Hello dear geekers, how are you? I'm Go the Geek Monitor, welcoming you to a new video essay. If it's your first time on the channel, I'll tell you that I like to take comics very seriously here, and we analyze them in depth to be able to see beyond the obvious. Today we are going to analyze the character of Miles Morales, a character that represents the values of Spider-Man very well. But who in his early days was involved in some controversies related to politics? We will discover here then how this inclusive character became the cultural icon we know today. Chapter 1. The controversial origin of Miles. In the last decade, we have seen a trend by companies to create characters that reflect the diversity in which we live. However, usually these new characters take up the mantle of an already established superhero or are alternate versions of him. This practice usually sparks a lot of controversy on social media, and although you may not believe it today, Miles Morales was no exception, as in 2011, several websites like The Atlantic or Forbes published stories of the media backlash the character experienced after being announced. And it is that, in addition to the controversy we usually see with these racially changed characters, Miles carried on his shoulders two other controversial news, one related to actor Donald Glover and another related to the then President of the United States, Barack Obama. On one hand, Marvel's editor-in-chief Axel Alonso said in an interview that this new Spider-Man was inspired by President Obama. In his words, today we have a president of mixed ethnicity. So, referring to Miles Morales, why not also have one of the world's greatest superheroes? However, in a country like the United States, where political power is divided into two major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, well, clearly, a statement like that would anger the other faction. Not only that, but Marvel, after learning that Obama was a fan of Spider-Man, published a comic in which the superhero and the president appeared together. And I don't know about you, but the truth is, I feel strange when a superhero is linked with a politician, whoever it may be. Beyond the mistakes or successes of Barack Obama's administration, the fact that an African-American person was elected as president in a country that even today cannot completely eradicate the deeply rooted racism problem it has. Without a doubt, it is a very important event, and it makes other people wonder if an African-American can become president, what else can they be? This has to do with the second controversy that Miles was involved in even before it came out, which was a media campaign in which the actor Donald Glover, through the hashtag #DonaldGlover4Spider-Man, asked to be allowed to audition for the role of Peter Parker in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, a proposal that became a worldwide trend on Twitter. This audition never happened and Andrew Garfield got the role, but Marvel certainly noticed people's interest in the topic. And this also influenced how the character of Miles Morales was initially perceived as a product of two controversial stories. However, all things considered, Miles was introduced to the Ultimate Marvel Universe on August 11, 2011 by writer Brian Michael Bendis. In his first appearances in the comics, we see how Miles also gets his powers after being bitten by a radioactive spider. However, Miles doesn't jump to being a superhero from the start, as his world already has a Spider-Man. He also doesn't have this teenage outburst that Peter had of trying to use his powers for personal benefit. Here, Miles already has enough problems to think about complicating his life even more. Not only is he a black boy who won a pass to a school where he doesn't feel comfortable, despite it offering him better opportunities in life, but when he used his powers to help someone, his head was filled with many doubts about what being a superhero really means. Doubts for which Miles was not yet ready. And let's remember that the bite of the radioactive spider is only a part of what it truly means to be Spider-Man. The other part has to do with the realization that great power comes with great responsibility. A conclusion that most Spider-Men come to through a tragic event. For Miles in the comic, this moment comes with the death of Peter Parker. When Peter dies in his battle against the Green Goblin, Miles can't help but feel responsible for this. In his mind, if he had used his powers to help from the beginning, surely Peter would have found him. And maybe Miles could have fought by his side in this last battle, thus avoiding his death. These events inspire Miles to finally become Spider-Man. However, he doesn't do it in the best way at first, as he uses a costume exactly like Peter's, which is considered in bad taste by people like Nick Fury or Jessica Drew, who knew Peter in these early comics. So, it's up to Miles to make this character his own, to be a Spider-Man in his own right. This was a great start for the character. However, despite his good intentions, Bendis' run had several flaws and many criticisms. Like the fact that they said his characters seemed shallow, that they were more like caricatures of what an African American person should be. However, the character's popularity grew and an animated movie took him to places never seen before. Chapter 2: Into the Spider-Verse. The Into the Spider-Verse movie was a success that even its creative team did not expect. We're talking about a movie with Miles Morales as the protagonist. A relatively new and African-American character suddenly became one of the favorite movies of Spider-Man fans. Thanks to this story, which perfectly captures the essence of the character and what being this superhero means in very diverse contexts. From the perspective we all know of Peter Parker, to other approaches like that of Miles Morales or Gwen Stacy. Not only that, but the audience and critics fell in love with these characters and the comic aesthetic that the movie handles. To such a degree that Into the Spider-Verse won the Oscar for Best Animated Film, defeating that year The Incredibles 2 from Pixar and Ralph Breaks. The Internet of Disney? Now the question is, what made this movie such a well-made product? Well, although the movie had the geniuses from other works like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Lego Movie, Chris Miller and Phil Lord as writers, it's also true that much of the movie's success is due to the choice of Peter Ramsey as its director, an African American who gave Miles that realism that Bendis sometimes failed to achieve. Because living as a black person makes you see life in a different way. The context in which you grow up matters. And that's where the importance of including diverse writers in the media lies. Sometimes there's a very thin line between paying tribute to a culture and promoting stereotypes of it. And the difficult thing is that there isn't a set of rules that apply to all situations, so each case has to be analyzed separately. In my opinion, in the movie Into the Spider-Verse, the creative team did an excellent job honoring African American culture through the character of Miles Morales. And it's that the small decisions that Miles makes throughout the movie feel real, from the music he listens to the clothes he wears. Everything has to do with the context in which Miles grew up and developed. Now one might think at first glance that this is simply a caricature of what an African American teenager should be. That is, he's black, he has to listen to hip-hop and wear a certain style of sneakers. But here, the movie links these superficial decisions with much deeper ones. For example, Miles feels that he doesn't fit in at this new school he's at. But he still decides to wear his red sneakers, which stand out among the others. He does this not only because he thinks he should stay true to his roots, but also as a way of telling people, I am here, this space also belongs to me. Something that African American culture has been doing for decades through cultural expressions like graffiti, through which they claim certain public spaces as their own. In fact, in the movie, Miles also marks various parts of the city with stickers and expresses himself through this mural he makes with his uncle. These details expose the idea then that over the years, African American culture has been marginalized. And it is through acts like this that they say this country is also mine. Something that derives directly from those protests in which African American people would show up in restaurants or establishments where they were not allowed to be. And this depth when dealing with these issues is what makes the movie a good representation of this culture and not a caricature. I mean, if it's an animated movie, do you understand me? This concept reaches its climax in the scene where Miles also modifies the original Spider-Man suit. Since here Miles is not appropriating a space, but the concept of a superhero, it's about Miles saying in this universe, I am Spider-Man. Not only that, but the movie also presents us with the other point of view. When Miles tells his dad that he wants to go back to his old school, what he calls the town, Jefferson makes him see that this distinction should not exist. That the people who are in that school are also down, and that Miles has every right to be there because he passed his admission exam. These contradictions between the ideals of what African American society is, that is a culture that even today is marginalized and are victims of higher rates of police brutality, and what should be a culture that is treated like any other, is represented through these two characters. The film then does an excellent job addressing a very complex issue and presenting it through a superhero movie. And this, without a doubt, is a very important part of Miles' popularity, but it's not the only one. Something I really like about the Spider-Verse concept is that throughout the multiverse, different versions of Spider-Man have completely different life circumstances. And yet they manage. To arrive at this Spider mantra of great power comes with great responsibility. At least the best versions of Spider-Man, since not all the so-called Spider Totems or Spider-Mans from the multiverse arrive at this heroic conclusion. If you're interested in an in-depth analysis of the Spider-Verse comic, leave a like. If this video reaches 7,000 likes, I'll create a comprehensive video essay on the topic. The point is that a good Spider-Man has to come to this conclusion, and Miles Morales, without a doubt, does so, but through a very different story. And I think this is part of what makes the character so appealing that it gives a fresh twist to a myth we already know. If you notice, while Peter gets his heroic sense after the murder of his Uncle Ben, who is a positive father figure, Miles gets part of his heroic sense in the movie after the death of his uncle. But on this occasion it's about a criminal, and could we really see him as a bad influence on Miles? However, beyond all this, I think Miles is a character that works better than many others. Spider-Man from the multiverse, because Peter Parker was a character who in essence spoke to black culture. In fact, African-American writer Walter Mosley says that Spider-Man is in essence the first black superhero in history. Mosley mentions that if you read the Spider-Man comics, you'll realize that he lives in a house with a single parent. In fact, it's not even a parent, he lives with his aunt. Despite his immense power, it always backfires whenever he wields it. People fear him, the police chase him, and the only job he can get is taking pictures that will be used against him. And all these situations made him, as an African American child, identify with this character. According to him then, Spider-Man lends itself to being interpreted as a commentary on what it means to be black in the United States. Of course, Spider-Man is white, and Stan Lee was not thinking about this racial discourse when creating this character. But it is also true that Stan has publicly said that one of his intentions when introducing Spider-Man was for people to identify with him. Since he thought that anyone under the right circumstances could be under the mask. Anyone who knows that with great power comes great responsibility could be Spider-Man. So, I think all these social issues and well-written stories come together and are part of this popularity that Miles has. Unfortunately, nowadays, writing a black or Latinx superhero, is it still a political act? It's a way in which African American culture appropriates spaces that are not usually theirs. And it's something that will become increasingly common in a social struggle context with movements like Black Lives Matter. We see it from characters like Miles Morales or Nick Fury to musicals like Hamilton, in which black actors play the founding fathers of the United States. And I think what's important is that these messages don't just stay as stories in comics or superhero movies. The message that anyone, under the right circumstances, can become Spider-Man or president or whatever they want to be. It's one that transcends the superhero genre and is one that the new generations undoubtedly deserve. Don't go yet. If you like this video essay about Miles Morales, I'm going to leave you others where I analyze Spider-Man's philosophy, or another analyzing Daredevil's ethics. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe. I'm Gio, the Geek Monitor, always looking beyond the obvious.